On Saturday, at precisely 6:45 am, Karen stood at Max's front gate, clipboard in hand, expression set in what she privately called her compliance face. Behind her, two men from the county inspector's office shifted uncomfortably. Calling in favors had been necessary after Maxwell's little stunt. The pool might have been cleaned, but she would make sure his violation record remained permanently stained. After 3 sharp knocks yielded no response, Karen checked her watch with an exaggerated sigh. He was informed of the inspection. This constitutes non-compliance. One of the inspectors, a younger man who clearly wished to be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, without homeowner consent, we can't legally." Section 12 of the HOA agreement grants authorized personnel access for compliance verification. Karen cut in, producing a key from her pocket. "As committee chair, I have emergency access." The second inspector looked dubious, but Karen was already unlocking the gate, marching down the garden path that she previously cited for excessive flowering plants beyond the approved variety list. But as they rounded the corner to the backyard, Karen stopped so abruptly that the inspectors collided with her back. The backyard was transformed. Where Max's non-compliant pool had stood was now an elaborate koi pond, complete with a small waterfall, decorative bridge, and water lilies floating peacefully on the surface. Japanese maples, definitely not on the approved landscaping list, provided dappled shade over meditation benches. "What? How?" Karen stammered, her clipboard dropping to her side. "Good morning," Max's cheerful voice called from the bridge, where he stood feeding the ornamental fish. "Hope you don't mind the renovation." Decided pools were too much trouble. One of the inspectors whistled appreciatively. "Beautiful work. Must have cost a fortune to convert it so quickly." "Worth every penny," Max replied, making his way toward them. "I believe koi ponds fall under different regulations than swimming pools. Isn't that right?" Karen's mind raced through the HOA rulebook she'd largely written herself. Swimming pools had 17 specific compliance requirements. Ornamental ponds had only 3, mostly concerning mosquito prevention, an oversight she'd never thought to correct. This was not submitted for approval, she finally managed. The Architectural Review Committee must. "Actually," Max interrupted, producing a folder. "I have the approval right here, signed yesterday by board members Davis and Chen." Karen snatched the document, scanning it with increasingly furious eyes. The 2 board members, the only ones who occasionally questioned her decisions, had indeed fast-tracked the approval. Karen Wilkinson stood frozen in horror, her designer sundress drenched and clinging to her frame, a mountain of iridescent bubbles rising around her like some prehistoric creature from the depths. Her carefully highlighted blonde bob was now a soapy disaster, and the clipboard she always carried, her weapon of choice, had slipped from her manicured fingers into the foamy abyss. "Wait till you done," she shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire Sunny Pines community, causing several neighbors to peek through their blinds at the spectacle unfolding in Maxwell Grant's backyard. Max leaned against his patio doorframe, arms crossed, a rare smile playing at his lips. "Just some routine pool maintenance, Karen. Didn't expect company at 7 am on a Saturday." This was of course a lie. Max had known exactly what he was doing when he dumped 15 bottles of dish soap into his pool filtration system at precisely 6:45 am. It was the 5th consecutive weekend Karen had inspected his backyard without permission, always finding some arbitrary HOA violation that required her immediate attention. Karen's face contorted with rage as she attempted to wade through what was now essentially the world's largest bubble bath. This is VNDA Allies and of Community Aesthetic Standards. Section 8, Paragraph 4 clearly states that all water features must maintain a clear, appealing appearance. "Funny," Max replied, taking a sip from his coffee mug. "I don't recall Section 8 covering unauthorized entry onto private property. Speaking of which, how exactly did you get into my locked backyard, Karen?" 2 months earlier, Max had moved into Sunny Pines following his divorce. At 42, he'd hoped for a fresh start in a peaceful community. What he got instead was Karen Wilkinson, the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association's 347-page rulebook, a document she seemed to have memorized and interpreted with zealous creativity. Their feud had begun innocently enough, a hanging basket of petunias that apparently violated the community's floral uniformity guidelines. But it escalated quickly. Citations for grass half an inch too tall. Warnings about his trash can being visible from the street for 17 minutes after collection. A formal letter regarding the unauthorized wind chime on his back porch that disrupted the community soundscape. But it was the pool that became Karen's obsession. The previous owners had installed an elegant in-ground pool that, according to Karen, required weekly documentation for chlorine levels, clarity standards, and recreational feature appropriateness. "I have every right to ensure compliance," Karen sputtered, finally reaching the pool steps, bubbles cascading off her like a deranged wedding cake. As HOA committee chair, "You have the right to send a letter requesting an inspection," Max interrupted. "You don't have the right to climb my fence while I'm sleeping." Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You think this is funny, Mr. Grant? You think turning your pool into some circus attraction is going to solve anything?" She attempted to flick soap from her watch, a luxury timepiece she mentioned being Swiss-made at every opportunity. "The board will hear about this. Expect significant fines." What Karen didn't know was that Max had already spoken with several board members who were equally tired of her reign of terror. He'd documented each unauthorized entry with his security cameras, building a case that would be presented at the next homeowners meeting. "I'm sure they will," Max replied calmly. "In the meantime, would you like a towel? Or perhaps a rubber duck to complete the bathing experience?" Karen's face flushed crimson as the neighbors began to gather at the fence line, smartphone cameras capturing her sudsy predicament. This wasn't just embarrassment. It was a direct challenge to her authority, her carefully constructed identity as the community's protector. For the first time since she'd strong-armed her way into the HOA presidency 3 years ago, someone was fighting back. And Karen Wilkinson didn't lose fights. "This isn't over," she hissed, dignity attempting to reassert itself despite the bubbles now forming a makeshift beard beneath her chin. Not by a long shot. Little did either of them know how true those words would prove to be. The doorbell rang as Max finished reading. Karen stood on his porch, clipboard restored to its rightful place in her arms, 2 stern-looking officials from the Water Authority thanking her. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice professionally sympathetic, "I wanted to personally explain the unfortunate situation. As community liaison, it's my responsibility to ensure all residents understand the environmental impact of non-compliance." The male official nodded gravely. "The watershed protection regulations are quite clear. Ornamental ponds pose a significant risk to groundwater integrity." "But swimming pools are allowed?" Max asked incredulously. "Chlorinated systems with approved filtration don't present the same biological contamination vectors," the second official explained, sounding suspiciously as if she were reading from a script Karen had prepared. "You have 30 days to restore the original pool or remove the water feature entirely," Karen said, unable to keep a note of triumph from her voice. "I've taken the liberty of contacting several approved contractors who can assist with compliance." As if on cue, a glossy brochure appeared from her clipboard, featuring a company called Wilkinson Environmental Solutions, clearly owned by or affiliated with Karen herself. "Of course, as your neighbor, I'm happy to expedite the process and offer a community discount," she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After they left, Max immediately called Walter, who arrived 10 minutes later with Diane and several other neighbors. "She fabricated the whole thing," Walter concluded after reviewing the notice. "There's no watershed protection zone here. The closest one is miles away." "But the Water Authority officials seemed legitimate," Max said. "Karen's brother-in-law works for the Regional Planning Commission," Diane explained, "and her college roommate is deputy director at the Water Authority. She's calling in every connection she has." Max stared out at his koi pond, where the fish moved peacefully, unaware their home was under threat. "So what do we do? If the authority is backing her?" "We go higher," Walter said firmly. "County supervisors, state environmental board, but it will take time, and meanwhile she wins, Max finished, the realization bitter in his mouth. That evening, a tentative knock at Max's door revealed a young woman he recognized as Karen's assistant from the HOA office. "She's gone too far," the assistant whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I can't be involved anymore." She pressed a USB drive into Max's hand. "Everything's here, the fake environmental reports, emails to her contacts pressuring them to back her claims, even a timeline for taking control of the properties she targets for environmental remediation." "Why are you doing this?" Max asked. The young woman looked down. "My grandmother had a koi pond. After she died, it was all I had left of her. Karen made me fill it in my first month here. Said it violated 6 different regulations." She met his eyes. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show everyone exactly who they are. As the sun set over Sunny Pines, 2 very different plans were set in motion. In Karen's home office, she made final arrangements for what she called the Restoration, a community-wide environmental initiative that would coincidentally place her in control of key properties, including Max's. Across the street, Max and a growing circle of allies prepared to reveal the full extent of Karen's manipulations, knowing they risked their standing in the community if they failed. Neither realized that the true turning point would come from an entirely unexpected direction. The community center parking lot overflowed on the night of the emergency meeting. Word had spread about the watershed protection issue, with residents divided between environmental concern and suspicion about Karen's involvement. The crowd murmured anxiously as Karen took the podium, flanked by her water authority allies and the 2 elderly board members who reliably supported her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "As you know, Sunny Pines faces an environmental compliance challenge that requires immediate action. I've prepared a comprehensive plan to address the watershed issues while minimizing disruption to our community standards." Behind her, a PowerPoint slide displayed a color-coded map of the neighborhood with nearly a third of the properties, primarily those belonging to residents who had opposed her over the years, highlighted in alarming red. "The affected areas will require significant remediation," she continued, clicking to a slide that outlined her company's services. "Fortunately, Wilkinson Environmental Solutions has the expertise to manage this transition smoothly." Max sat in the back row between Walter and Diane, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. They had agreed to wait until Karen finished her presentation before revealing what they knew. Timing would be everything. But just as Karen began detailing the special assessment fees required for compliance, the community center doors burst open. A distinguished-looking man in his 70s entered, assisted by a younger woman. Though he moved slowly with a cane, his presence immediately commanded attention. Karen froze mid-sentence, her complexion suddenly ashen. "I apologize for interrupting," the man said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance, "but I believe this meeting concerns property I still maintain a legal interest in." Walter leaned toward Max. "Harold Pemberton," he whispered, "the original developer of Sunny Pines. Nobody's seen him in years." Karen seemed to have forgotten her presentation entirely. "Mr. Pemberton," she said, her voice unnaturally high. We weren't expecting your health. Improved enough for me to respond to some very concerning documents that crossed my desk," Pemberton replied, making his way slowly to the front. Specifically, environmental reports about a watershed that, as the person who spent 2 years conducting geological surveys before breaking ground on this community, I can assure you does not exist. A murmur ran through the crowd as Pemberton reached the podium. Karen reluctantly stepped aside, visibly calculating her options. "For those who don't know me, I founded Sunny Pines with a vision of community harmony. The HOA was established to maintain common areas and prevent genuine hazards, not to police flower choices or harass homeowners." He fixed Karen with a stern gaze. "Certainly not to fabricate environmental crisis for personal gain." "Mr. Pemberton," Karen interjected, "with all due respect, the regulations have evolved since your time, and our property values." have risen consistently for 15 years. Pemberton finished for her. I still receive the market reports, Ms. Wilkinson. What has declined is community satisfaction, with Sunny Pines now ranking lowest in the county for neighborhood relations. He gestured to the woman accompanying him, who distributed documents to the board members. As the majority stakeholder in the community trust that oversees the HOA charter, I am exercising my right to dissolve the current board and call for new elections. Additionally, I've filed a formal complaint regarding the misrepresentation of environmental data. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps, applause, and confused questions. Max watched as Karen gripped the edge of the nearby table, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "You can't do this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The bylaws." For 2 weeks, Karen was uncharacteristically silent. No violation notices appeared on doorsteps. No measuring tape emerged to assess lawn ornament heights. No surprise inspections interrupted weekend barbecues. The residents of Sunny Pines exhaled collectively, many stopping by Max's meditation garden to thank him and enjoy a moment of peace by the koi pond. "She's planning something," warned Walter as they sat on Max's patio one evening. "I've lived across from her for 7 years. Karen doesn't retreat, she regroups." Max nodded, watching the sunset reflect off his new pond. The unexpected community that had formed around standing up to Karen had brought him more joy than he'd experienced since before his divorce. For the first time, Sunny Pines felt like home. "Whatever she's planning, we'll handle it together," he said, raising his glass in a toast that Walter returned with a worried smile. Meanwhile, in Karen's immaculate home office, scattered papers covered surfaces that normally wouldn't tolerate a single paperclip out of place. County records, property deeds, planning commission minutes, and architectural surveys created a paper trail of her obsession. Mr. Whiskers walked across a blueprint, leaving paw prints that Karen didn't even notice, a sign of how far she'd departed from her normally fastidious standards. It was always there, she whispered to herself, circling a section of the community planning document for the 5th time. Hidden in plain sight. The next morning, residents of Sunny Pines woke to official-looking letters in their mailboxes, not from the HOA this time, but from the Regional Water Authority. Karen's name appeared at the bottom as Community Liaison for Environmental Compliance. Max read the dense technical notice with growing alarm. According to the letter, an environmental assessment had uncovered that the northwestern section of the community, precisely where his home was located, sat upon a previously undocumented watershed protection zone. Effective immediately, all non-essential water features were prohibited, with mandatory removal required within 30 days. A highlighted paragraph specifically mentioned recent conversions of swimming pools to organic water features as particularly problematic due to filtration requirements and biological contamination risks. "This is highly irregular," she sputtered. "We thought you'd approve," said a new voice, and Karen turned to see Diane and Walter entering through the side gate, carrying trays of coffee and pastries. "Community beautification project. Doesn't it enhance property values?" Behind them came a stream of neighbors, all ostensibly arriving for what appeared to be some sort of morning garden party. Karen recognized faces that had, until recently, displayed appropriate fear when she approached with her clipboard. "We formed a new neighborhood committee," Walter explained, handing the stunned inspectors coffee cups, "focused on community wellness and neighbor relations. Max's Meditation Garden is our first sponsored project." "There is no such authorized committee," Karen said through clenched teeth. "Not yet," Diane replied pleasantly. "The vote's scheduled for the special meeting next week." "Oh, didn't you get the notice?" The board reset the May meeting after some concerns about proper procedure. Karen felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. The inspectors, clearly recognizing they'd been manipulated into a neighborhood dispute, were already making excuses to leave. "This isn't over," Karen said, echoing her words from the bubble bath incident, though with notably less conviction. "Of course not," Max agreed pleasantly. "The community is always evolving. Oh, and we're planning to review all HOA guidelines next month. Streamline them, make them more reasonable. We'd welcome your input, of course. As the impromptu garden party bloomed around her, Karen stood rigid, forgotten at its edges. For the first time in years, the community was gathering without her orchestration, following rules she hadn't written. She retreated to her house across the street, watching from behind her blinds as laughter and conversation flowed in Max's backyard. The betrayal stung worse than the humiliation. She protected these people, maintained their property values, preserved the community aesthetic, and this was how they repaid her. That night, Karen did something she hadn't done in years. She cried, silent tears tracking down her face as Mr. Whiskers watched with unblinking eyes. Then, methodically, she began to plan. Maxwell Grant thought he'd won, but he didn't understand what he was dealing with. Karen hadn't become the most feared HOA president in county history by backing down from a challenge. They wanted war. She would give them apocalypse. By Monday morning, every resident of Sunny Pines had seen the video. Posted anonymously to the community Facebook page, though everyone suspected Max's next-door neighbor, a retired photojournalist named Walter. The 3-minute clip of Karen's bubble bath adventure had garnered more comments than the announcement of the community pool renovation. The footage ended with her squelching across Max's lawn, leaving a trail of suds like some vengeful snail. The humiliation burned in Karen's chest as she sat rigidly at her kitchen island, scrolling through the comments on her tablet. First good laugh I've had since moving here. Team Max all the way. Maybe we should add bubble baths to the community calendar. Karen set the tablet down with precise control, though she wanted nothing more than to hurl it through her meticulously cleaned window. This wasn't just about a bubble-filled pool anymore. This was about respect, about the very fabric of the community she dedicated herself to perfecting. People didn't understand what would happen without her vigilance. Before she'd taken over, Sunny Pines had been descending into chaos. Unapproved paint colors, visible basketball hoops, and one family had even attempted to install a satellite dish visible from the street. Property values would have plummeted. Standards would have collapsed. Someone had to maintain order. He thinks this is a game, she murmured to her Siamese cat, Mr. Whiskers, who watched her with the same judgmental expression she typically leveled at HOA violators. He doesn't understand what I've built here. Karen opened a perfectly organized drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Inside was her contingency plan for community troublemakers. She'd never needed to implement the higher-level strategies before. Most residents buckled after a strongly worded letter or two. Maxwell Grant would require special attention. Across the community, Max was experiencing something novel: popularity. Neighbors who had previously only offered tight-lipped smiles were stopping by with bottles of wine and casseroles, sharing their own Karen stories. She measured my holiday lights with a ruler, explained Diane from 3 doors down. Said they hung 2 inches lower than regulation. Sent me a certified letter about the color of my garden hose. Walter added, topping off Max's glass. Apparently forest green is acceptable, but emerald is visually disruptive. Max was simultaneously heartened and disturbed. Why does everyone put up with it? The neighbors exchanged glances. She knows people, explained Walter quietly. The city inspector, folks on the planning commission. Cross Karen, and suddenly your permit applications get lost. Your property tax assessment comes back higher than expected. Plus, she has unlimited time, added Diane. She retired from corporate law 5 years ago. Now policing Sunny Pines is her full-time job. Someone needs to stand up to her, Max said. Walter's expression grew serious. Be careful. The last guy who tried ended up moving after she found a structural concern with his back deck, had it condemned. That night, Max reviewed his security footage from the past month, documenting each of Karen's trespasses. He emailed several board members he'd befriended, explaining the situation and requesting that it be addressed at the upcoming meeting. At 3:17 a.m., his phone chimed with an email notification. Emergency notice. Due to scheduling conflicts, the May HOA meeting has been cancelled. All agenda items will be addressed by the executive committee. K. Wilkinson, Chair. Max stared at his phone in disbelief. She'd outmaneuvered him. The following morning, An official-looking letter arrived under his door. The HOA Executive Committee, which apparently consisted of Karen and 2 elderly residents who rubber-stamped her decisions, had fined him $2,500 for willful contamination of a registered water feature and creating a visual nuisance visible from community property. Attached was a second notice informing him that his backyard would undergo mandatory weekly inspections, effective immediately, with the first scheduled for 7 a.m. Saturday. Max read the notice twice, then reached for his phone. If Karen wanted war, she'd get one. Across the street, behind her bay window, Karen watched Max's house through expensive binoculars. For a moment, she felt a twinge of something, not quite regret, but a dim recognition that perhaps she'd gone too far. She pushed the feeling aside. Communities needed rules. Rules needed enforcement. And she'd been chosen, well, she'd chosen herself to be that enforcer. Mr. Whiskers rubbed against her ankles, but she barely noticed, already planning her next move in a conflict that was rapidly spinning beyond reason. "Were written by my attorneys," Pemberton said gently, "including the clauses about fraudulent representation and abuse of position." What followed was a community catharsis years in the making. One by one, residents stood to share their experiences under Karen's regime, the arbitrary fines, the personal vendettas thinly veiled as compliance issues, the constant anxiety of living under surveillance. Max didn't need to use the evidence on the USB drive. The dam had broken on its own, years of resentment pouring forth in a flood Karen couldn't control. As the meeting concluded with plans for a special election the following month, Max approached Pemberton. "Thank you," he said simply. "But how did you know?" The older man smiled. "Your koi pond, my niece, is on the actual regional water authority. When Karen's fabricated documents appeared with an official letterhead, she contacted me immediately." He glanced across the room where Karen sat alone, staring blankly at her now useless clipboard. Sometimes people get so caught up in enforcing rules that they forget the purpose behind them. 3 months later, Sunny Pines had transformed. Under a newly elected board, which Max had declined to join, preferring to tend his garden, the 347-page rulebook had been condensed to a reasonable 24 pages, focused on safety and common areas. Property values remained stable, despite Karen's dire predictions. Karen herself had withdrawn from community life, rarely seen except for brief outings with Mr. Whiskers, tentatively exploring the neighborhood on a leash. The environmental fraud allegations had been settled privately, with Karen agreeing to dissolve her company and pay restitution to homeowners who had been financially affected by her schemes. On a warm Saturday morning, Max was surprised to find her standing by his garden gate, looking uncertain, a new expression for the formerly confident HOA tyrant. "Your water lilies are blooming," she said awkwardly. "They're nice." Max studied her, noticing the subtle changes. Hair less rigidly styled, clothing more casual, the ever-present clipboard nowhere in sight. "Would you like to see them closer?" he offered, opening the gate. "The fish are usually more active in the morning." Karen hesitated, then nodded, following him to the pond's edge. They stood in silence watching the koi glide beneath the lilies. "I had a garden like this once," she finally said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Before my husband left, he said I was too controlling, too obsessed with perfection." She gave a small, sad laugh. "Imagine that." Max didn't reply, sensing she needed to speak more than be spoken to. "The rules made sense to me," she continued. "Clear boundaries, clear consequences. Black and white in a world full of gray." She watched a brilliant orange koi surface briefly. "I thought I was protecting something valuable." "You were," Max said carefully. "Just not the way you thought." A hesitant smile touched her lips. "The community's planning a barbecue next weekend." "I don't suppose." "There's room for everyone," Max replied, "even reformed HOA dictators." As Karen left, Max noticed her straighten slightly, some of her old confidence returning, but tempered now with something new. Perhaps it was humility, or simply the recognition that control was always an illusion, especially when it came to the messy, imperfect business of building a community. Behind him, The koi continued their peaceful circuits, unaware they had been the catalyst for Sunny Pine's transformation. Max smiled, dropping food pellets that created ripples across the pond's surface, distortions that would eventually fade, leaving the water clear once again.